Be ready. 5 seconds.
Respected Speaker, I thank you for granting this House the opportunity to discuss this topic that has undoubtedly attained singular importance in the nation: the widespread impact of COVID 19, and specifically to lay bare this government's mismanagement of this crisis. It is a painful reflection of the grim times we live in, and equally a reminder of how important it is for us to take time and discuss this vital issue in this House. Just as there are rules and conventions that guide the functioning of this august House, a set of principles and systems that are adhered to under your leadership and supervision, as you often remind us, Mr. Speaker, so too in any democratic country there is an age old contract between the citizen and the government, which rides on certain fundamental expectations: the transparent functioning of the government, the upholding of inalienable rights, the access to basic resources to sustain an empowered life, the sound management of our economy through competent policy making, a participative and democratic decision making process, and above all, the conviction and capability of an elected government to ensure that the safety and security of individual citizens is never compromised. This context is important for all of us who have gathered here to recognize, because we must understand the scale of the breathtaking violations of this basic compact by our government during the last 6 months. The situation precipitated by the COVID 19 pandemic was certainly extraordinary in terms of its rampant spread and impact across all walks of life. However, sir, it must be said that such a situation of distress is where our citizens would expect their government to reaffirm their special contract that holds us together. But instead of mature and proactive governance, we have collectively witnessed a fundamental breakdown in government machinery in these past 6 months. Instead of clearly communicated protocols and strategies, we have collectively seen an alarming lack of clarity, readiness, and preparedness to tackle this virus. And above all, where the citizens of the country expected their government to lead them out of this darkness, we have sadly witnessed a betrayal of the concerns and aspirations of the people by the very government they elect. Respected Speaker, Sir, let us look at how things unraveled in the last 6 months. As early as in January, there were indications that the virus that had originated in Wuhan was far more complex and potentially devastating than we had earlier imagined. By January 30, the World Health Organization had declared the COVID 19 virus as a public health emergency, a declaration that came on the same day that India too had its first documented case in the form of a student who had returned to Kerala from Wuhan. When this government failed to produce any reaction to these developments, on February 12, my colleague and an honorable member of this House tweeted and publicly warned the ruling party. The government ignored this to host a crowded welcome to President Trump in Ahmedabad, driven by what appeared to be greater interest in toppling a state government in Madhya Pradesh rather than national priorities. The present ruling party continued to delay the implementation of a national strategy to clamp down on the spread of the virus. This honorable chairperson was the first failure of this government. I will mention five of them in due course. A failure to recognize the scale and complexity of the problem we were dealing with. Still, given at that point the number of cases were comparatively low in India, there was still time for the government to execute a well thought out strategy to curb the virus. While experts may differ on details of lockdown strategies, they were all unanimous in their opinion that sufficient notice and advance warning are critical for a successful lockdown. Advance warning would have given critical time for our medical systems and frontline healthcare workers to prepare for an onslaught of cases. Advance warnings would have given time for those who were at that point overseas to make it back to the country. Advance warnings would have allowed those within the country, particularly economically vulnerable groups like our migrant workers, sufficient time to make it back to their respective home states, where they would have had necessary support systems to look after themselves. But perhaps, above all, surely the provision of advance warning and transparent announcement is a basic courtesy that any government should have extended to the people of our country. It is a moral responsibility, after all, of the government to take the nation into confidence and not leave them in the dark. What we have seen in these last years, sir, is that this government has a remarkable liking for shock and awe tactics, rather than mature leadership.